being in a house on a cliff next to the sea so we could hear the waves crashing at night. I'd love that. Or maybe...
That's Santorini.
Pardon?
That's Santorini.
Sounds good, doesn't it? Or maybe, maybe a deserted tropical beach with nobody there except somebody that comes in to cook and clean for me. That sounds pretty good too. Or maybe even a foreign country where people get their ears and their eyes mixed up. Don't know where that would be. Or what if you could travel to another timeline, another time? I would always like to go and just look at the grandeur of King Henry VIII's castle. Don't want to live there, wouldn't want to stay there for very long, but I'd love a chance to go visit. Or I'd love a chance to go and sit and be able to follow Jesus around. Time, and just sit on the mountain with him as he's breaking the bread and feeding the 5,000. That'd be awesome. I'll tell you where I don't want to be. I don't want to go to Smyrna in the 1st century, because that is one tough place to live. The church of Smyrna received this second letter from Jesus. And, let's have a look a little bit about what life is like in Smyrna. Smyrna, for those of you that haven't worked it out yet, is about 56 k's north of Ephesus. So if you found Ephesus on the map last week, or the map back, about 56 k's north of Ephesus is this town of Smyrna. It was also a port city. It was known as being one of the most beautiful port cities in the Roman Empire. It was not a small town. In fact, it was bigger than Napier. They reckon it had about 100,000 people in it. That's pretty big for those days. And it was a town that had lots of, just like Ephesus, it had lots of temples, it had lots of libraries and stadiums and public theatres and all those things. And it was a town that was really, really proud of its history. So its history said in 600 BC, the Lydians had a king called Atalates. God, I love that name. And he came in and he conquered Smyrna and he absolutely demolished it. And it was left as just a humble fishing village. And it stayed just this humble fishing village for years until Alexander the Great came back in and he resurrected it to be this great, big port town. And so they were really pleased about that. And they used to often talk about how they had died and come back to life. And so now, as John pens this letter, he uses these same themes that are familiar to them. You weren't dead, but now you're alive. There's something different about this church to Ephesus, because it follows pretty much the same pattern as we had in Ephesus. It has that description of Jesus, and then it has the commendation, and then Ephesus and 5 of the other churches have reproofs. But Smyrna doesn't. Jesus never says, but I hold this against you. He only had good things to say about the church in Smyrna. Hey, that's pretty good. Pity it was such a hard place to live. So as we go through this, let's have a look. So it says, to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of him who is first and last, who died and came to life again. Interesting. Jesus is taking what he knows about the history of Smyrna. They died and came back to life again. He goes, I know all about that because I have died and I have come back to life again. And I am the one who is now writing this letter to you. It says, these are the words of him who is first and last, who died and came back to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but they are the synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you into prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Now, Jesus starts off this letter with, I know. I know how tough life is for you right now. I know all the persecution that you are going through. I know how hard it is when those Jews are slandering you. I know. And you know, Jesus would be saying exactly the same to you if in your situation today. For those of you that are going through tough times, Christ is going, I know. I know. How comforting is it when life is really painful, having somebody to come alongside you and go, I know what you are going through. I got a letter, a message yesterday from my boss's wife. She's in Sydney. Her kids are live with Jonathan in Brisbane. They can't get up there. You know, even though they are in Australia, they are just as isolated as I am. And she was just sharing her heartburden of not being able to get to see her kids. And one of her kids is going through a tough time. And I went, I know. I know how hard this is. You know, not only does he say, I know, he says, I know about your afflictions and your poverties. And in Smyrna, these two things went hand in hand. Their afflictions and their poverty. They were in poverty because they were Christians. Remember in Ephesus last week we were talking about going into the agora and how when you went into the agora you had to put in some incense on the incense burner to Caesar, and if you didn't do that then you couldn't be part of the trade guilds and you couldn't do anything else. Well, the same was happening here in Smyrna. And so these Christians, they couldn't trade and sell. Well, what do you do if you can't trade and sell? That's a real problem. That meant that they were in poverty. But interestingly, Jesus says, I know your poverty, and yet you are rich. What? Did they have their secret treasure stashed away somewhere? What was Jesus referring to? Well, if we look back at one of the parables Jesus taught on in Luke 12, verse 13 to 21, and it says here, someone in the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. I like this. Such a basic, everyday, this is what's affecting me in my life here today. And Jesus goes, man, who appointed me judge or an arbitrator between you? Then he said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kind of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build a bigger one, and then I will store my surplus grain. Then I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain, laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. Jesus is saying to the Smyrnans, you are rich in God. You may not be rich. You may not have enough money. You may be really struggling, but you are rich in God. You know, the man in the parable, he was rich and ultimately he lost it all. But Jesus goes, you're poor, but in the grand scheme of things, you are rich. And that is better than money. But that wasn't their only problem. The Christians in Smyrna actually had 3 really, really big problems. That was the first of them, that they were poor and that they were afflicted in and poverty. The second one was this, that they were being slandered by the Jews. You know, there was a really big Jewish population in Smyrna at this time, and the Christians were not at all popular with them. Probably for 2 reasons. Number one, if somebody is actually taking members away from your church and into another church, it's always difficult to have great feelings towards them, because sometimes we forget that it's all God's. And definitely the Jews there had some resentment that this Christian church was flourishing. But secondly, the Jews also, the Christians endangered some of the perks that the Jews had in the Roman Empire at that time. The Jews alone were not forced to worship Caesar as a god because the Romans recognized that they worshipped one god and that they would only worship one god. So they didn't demand that they worship Caesar. Now they demanded that of everybody else. When Christianity started, as far as the Roman Empire was concerned, initially the Romans went, well, this is like a sect of the Jewish religion, so we will let, we'll let the same thing happen. But as time went on and the Christians gained in popularity, this changed. And the Jews they were suddenly wanting to disassociate themselves from those Christians. Because we don't want to be thought of the same as them. Because then when they stop them from being able to worship and demanding that they're worshipping Caesar, they might demand the same of us as well. So they weren't popular in between them. And the slander took place in 3 ways. There were three popular slanders that they had. The first one was this, that those Christians, when they meet together, they have big orgies. They have something called a love feast. You know what a love feast must be. It's an orgy. Now, just in case anybody doesn't know, a love feast is when you gather together for your communal meals. You know, much like we do next Sunday for our shared lunch. But that was the rumour that was going around. Then the second one was those Christians, they're cannibals. They eat flesh and drink blood of this person called Christ. That's what they do when they come. Of course, they were celebrating communion. The last rumour was those Christians don't really care about each other, about us. They only care about each other. They call each other brother and sister. That means that they're more interested in themselves as that little sect than the families that they belong to, that they've come from. So there were these 3 things that they were aiming at them. And you could go, well, sticks and stones broke my bones, but names will never hurt me. But you know, you got it on top of things that already happened. So I'm already broke. I'm already struggling to make ends meet. And every time I walk down the street, I'm having all these abuse and everything hurled at me. But it didn't just end there either. Because the last thing that happened to them was persecution. And that wasn't just going to hurt their feelings. Jesus said, don't be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you that the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. 10 days didn't mean 10 literal days, just meant a short time. You know, maybe the persecution had already started, but Jesus was writing this letter, and he goes, guys, it's going to get worse. Who wants a letter like this? Now, let's just think about what this persecution would be like. To start off with, they would be thrown into a rat-infested dungeon, probably crowded, probably pretty airless and lightless, probably stank with all the other people that, couldn't shower and etc. Probably stank because, you have the communal poo pot in the corner. And you would have to stay there while they examined you. And their examinations would take form in this place. Michelle, you don't want to be a Christian. You want to deny Christ. Forget about him. What's he ever done for you? All you have to do is light this incense to Caesar, and we'll let you go home again. All you have to do. How tempting must that have been? All I have to do is pretend, God, you know that in my heart of hearts that I'm really for you. I'm doing this to save my life. And Jesus goes, no, you need to stay strong. Now, one of the most famous of the early martyrs came from Smyrna. His name was Polycarp. If you know anything about biblical history, you will have heard about the Bishop of Smyrna, Polycarp. He was 86 years old when he was brought before the proconsul, and they tried to force him to deny Christ and to worship Caesar. And this was his response. 86 years have I served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my King and my Saviour? I wonder whether the challenge to this letter to Smyrna rang through the ears of Polycarp at that time as he was standing before them, where it says, be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you a victor's crown. Polycarp was faithful to the point of death. He had an unusual death. They decided that they were going to burn him at the stake. That was one of the ways that they used to deal with these Christians. You either be fed to the wild animals or burnt at the stake. So they tied his hands together, and traditionally they would nail you to the stake. Now there is a little bit of confusion as to whether they couldn't find any nails or something had happened anyway. Polycarp says, don't worry about the nails. The God who gives me the strength to endure this will give me this strength to stand there. So he stood there, they built a fire around him, and they lit it. And the flame, the eyewitnesses say the flame came out like a big wind, said like the sail of a boat in full sail, and it came out and around him. And instead of smelling burnt body smell, they all smelt this sound, this beautiful, beautiful incense smell. And instead of seeing a burnt body, apparently Polycarp looked like beautiful golden bread inside. That's what the eyewitnesses say. Unfortunately for Polycarp, they decided that if that wasn't going to kill him, that the dagger would, and so they stabbed him, and that was the end of it. They stabbed him, and apparently, again, lots of things happened there. But even when they stabbed him, Polycarp could stand there because he is going, the one who is victorious is not going to be hurt by the second death. The one who is victorious is not going to be hurt by the second death. This is tough. This is really tough. But they can kill your body. But I am safe in Jesus Christ. In many ways, this letter to the church in Smyrna is not a popular one. We like it when God delivers Daniel from the mouth of the lions. We like it when Brother Andrew miraculously gets over the border with a boot full of Bibles. We like it when Peter walks out past all the guards and out of the jail. But this letter reminds us that that is not always the way that it happens. James was put to death by the sword, but John survived. Corrie ten Boom survived the concentration camp, but her sister Betsy died. Jim Elliot died on the mission field, but Hudson Taylor lived a long life. We like it when God delivers us from pain and suffering, but the letter to Smyrna shows us that God's expectations in the midst of persecution are that we are to be faithful to the point of death. And we sit here in New Zealand in 2020 and you go, oh God, is this really going to happen to us? But here's the thing, I'm so aware of Peter. And Peter going in and saying, yep, Jesus, they can do anything to me. I will follow you even to the point of death. But as soon as life got a little bit tough, he ran away. If we've never ever thought about this, then how do we do it? I just go, Lord, I can't do it in my own strength because I know I don't like pain. But the last thing I ever want to do is deny my Lord and Savior. I looked up as part of this. I looked up the names of the people who have been Christian martyrs since the year 2000. There is a considerable number of them. These people have received the crown of life, the crown of victory from Jesus Christ in the last 20 years. Let me read you their names. They were the Kohesh martyrs in Egypt. Rufus Haley, Martin Burnham, Mary Stakowitz, Andrea Santoro, Fabulous Thibault, Leonella Sorbetti, Rahim Ghani, and companions. Paulos Harugrano, Nicholas, I'm not going to try and say his last name, sorry. The Nag Hammadi martyrs, Baghdad martyrs, Luigi Padovi, Shabas Betty, the Nigerian martyrs, Franz van Loot, the Christian martyrs murdered by ISIL, the 21 Coptic martyrs of Liberia, Jacques Hummel, the Cairo martyrs, the Alexandria martyrs, the Sutherland Spring martyrs, the Sri Lankan martyrs. Each one of those people, at the end of that day, when I'm going to stand firm in my faith to the point of death. What a challenge that is for us today. Sometimes we don't even want to stand firm in our faith to go, yes, I go to church, and yes, I pray, and yes, I believe in God. Yet these people have all stood there. And that is a challenge for us today. Stand firm in your faith through everything. And the reward that you're going to get is that Christ will give you a victor's crown. We might just do the victor's crown song. Neville? So let's sing that and then go through after that. Hopefully. Let me pray while we're doing that. Lord, I'm going to confess that this is a hard message, God. Will you give us the strength, day by day, to stand firm in all things? Whether it's the challenge of just being silent, whether it's the challenge of having slander against us because of our Christian faith, whether it's even there to stand up and go, we're willing to die, rather than to say that Jesus Christ is not Lord. Thank you for the men and women that have gone before us, that you are the examples of how to stand firm in their faith. Lord, I pray that the time will never come that we have to make that decision. But if we do, you give us the strength through the power of your Holy Spirit to stand firm to the point of death. Amen.